My name is Sloane Vargas. I'm 33 years old. I was 11 weeks pregnant and standing on the garden terrace my in-laws' estate. The evening my mother-in-law decided I was a con artist. She had the speech ready. I understand that now. She'd been rehearsing it since before her invitations went out, and she delivered it in front of 41 people with the practiced fluency of a woman who had spent 64 years winning every room she walked into. What she did 90 seconds later put me in a trauma bay and put her somewhere she had never once in her life expected to end up. My profession is forensic accounting. I trace financial fraud for a living. I build cases from paper trails. I reconstruct what happened from what people wrote down when they thought no one was looking. I have never worked a case more efficiently than the one she handed me the night she decided to use her hands. I should start with who I was before the Kessler family, because they spent the following year telling a version of me that I didn't recognize and need you to understand was never true. I grew up in Tucson, the daughter of a woman who managed a grocery store and a man who drove freight. Not difficult, not dramatic, just modest, honest, and completely without safety nets. When my parents' car died in 2009, they rode bikes to work for 4 months and didn't tell me until the car was replaced. That's the family I come from. The kind where you figure things out and you don't make it a story. I studied accounting at the University of Arizona on a combination of scholarships and weekend shifts at a hotel front desk. After college, I got hired by a mid-size audit firm. After 3 years of that, I moved into forensic work, the specific lane of accounting that examines financial records when something has gone wrong and someone needs to prove it. Embezzlement, insurance fraud, estate manipulation, and business disputes where one partner has been quietly stealing from another for years, while everyone else looks the other way. I'm good at it. I'm methodical. I keep records the way some people keep photographs, compulsively, categorically, because the record is the truth and everything else is subject to the weather of whoever's telling the story that day. I have a condo in Denver that I bought on my own salary. I have a car paid off in 4 years. I have a savings account that is nobody's business and that I managed without help from anyone's family trust. I tell you this not to catalog my virtues, but because you need to understand what the Kesslers decided I was, and how wrong they were, and how expensively wrong that turned out to be. I met Daniel Kessler at a financial industry conference in Chicago when I was 28. He was presenting on real estate development and he was good at it. Clear, confident, the kind of speaker who understood that the audience's time mattered. We talked for 40 minutes at the cocktail reception afterward, traded cards, had dinner the following night, and were in a long-distance relationship by New Year's. Daniel was warm, quick, genuinely interested in other people's work in a way that a lot of accomplished men aren't. He remembered things I'd said 3 conversations ago. He brought flowers to my apartment the first time he visited without announcing that he'd brought flowers. He called my mother on her birthday because he'd written it in his phone after I mentioned it once in passing. I want you to understand that I loved him. I want to be precise about that because the easy narrative, the one his family tried to build, requires me to have been cold and strategic from the beginning. I was not. I was a 30-year-old woman in love with a man who seemed like the genuine article. The parts of him that were borrowed out turned out to be borrowed from his mother's checkbook. But I didn't know that yet. I knew the parts of him that were genuinely his, and those parts were real and they were good. The Kessler family money lived in a privately held real estate development company and a family trust connected to it, worth somewhere between 7 and 10 million depending on which asset you were looking at and what the market was doing. Daniel's father, Richard, was 68, quiet, in the way of men who have always had other people make noise for them. His sister Naomi was 35, worked nominally in the family business, and had her mother's gift for walking into a room and immediately understanding what she could get from it, And then there was Gloria. Gloria Kessler was 64 years old, and she was the architect of everything: the company's strategic direction, the family's social life, her children's emotional dependencies. She was not cruel in obvious ways. She was precise in quiet ways, which is worse. She had a gift for the sentence that lands like a compliment until you're alone later and realize it was a measurement. She sat at the head of every table, regardless of whose house she was in. She wore silk in neutral colors and never once raised her voice because she never needed to. She had been the primary trustee of the Kessler Family Trust since her own mother-in-law stepped back 12 years ago. The trust funded Daniel's development projects when they ran over budget. The trust had also funded a renovation to Naomi's house and a vehicle for Richard and a research trip to New Zealand that had something to do with property acquisition and mostly seemed to involve wineries. The trust was Gloria's primary instrument of control, and everyone in the family understood this in the specific way that people understand things they have decided not to examine too closely. The first time I met her, she shook my hand with both of hers, looked me in the eye, and said, "You're the forensic accountant. I've heard so much about you," she said, forensic accountant with the faintest emphasis on forensic, as if the word itself were slightly exotic, slightly concerning. I filed it under. "She's testing me." I smiled and said I'd heard wonderful things about her too, which was true, because Daniel had only told me wonderful things, which was itself a poet I should have weighted differently. She treated me with warmth at every subsequent gathering and watched me with the focused attention of someone cataloging evidence. I told myself that protective parents were like that. I told myself she would warm up. I was good at telling myself things that made continued optimism possible. We got married 2 years later in Vale. Beautiful, small, largely organized by Gloria, with Daniel's enthusiastic participation, which I now understand as the thing it was. His mother planning the ceremony so thoroughly that I was more guest than bride. I altered what I could. I kept my own last name. That last part seemed to bother Gloria in a way she never quite articulated, but that I could feel like a temperature shift every time it came up. 3 months before the wedding, Richard called us into his study for a conversation about a prenuptial agreement. The Kessler Trust assets needed protection, he said. Business assets, family assets, standard practice, nothing personal. I signed it the same afternoon they gave it to me. I signed it in front of the notary and their attorney and my own attorney. I'd hired one to review it the same day Daniel told me about it. And I signed it without argument because I had my own condo and my own career and my own savings account and absolutely zero interest in someone else's family money. My attorney noted one clause for me before I signed. The agreement was explicit and comprehensive. Under no circumstances, including divorce, death, or any other dissolution of the marriage, could I make any claim against the Kessler Family Trust or the Kessler Development Company. No inheritance, no spousal claim, nothing. The trust was fully ring-fenced from me in every legal direction imaginable, and handed it back and said, "That's a thorough document." The Kessler attorney looked faintly surprised, like he'd expected more resistance. I put my copy in the fireproof file box where I keep my professional licenses, my condo deed, my car title, and my tax returns. Documents that establish who I am and what I've built. I keep that box the way other people keep family photographs. It would become the most important file I owned. I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday morning in late September. I was between cases, caught up on a report I'd been behind on, and I sat in my bathroom for a long time, staring at 2 lines and feeling the specific quality of happiness that has no performance in it because there's no audience. At 11 weeks, the OB did an ultrasound. The image came up on the screen, and I saw it, a small, perfect, furious heartbeat. The tech printed me a picture with my name, and the date, and the gestational measurement stamped across the bottom. I held it all the way to the parking lot before I called Daniel. He cried. Not the performative kind. The kind that happens when someone has been hoping for something and the hoping has just resolved. I loved him for that. We decided to tell the family at the estate at the Kesslers' regular late October gathering. What Gloria called the harvest dinner, which was less about harvest than about having everyone assembled in a setting she controlled. An estate in the foothills outside Denver, 12 acres, a house that looked like it was designed to be photographed. The garden terrace ran along the back of the house, maybe 10 feet above the lower garden paths, with a decorative stone balustrade along the edge. Not high enough to kill someone, I had noted when I first visited. In the involuntary actuarial way, I note structural and risk features of spaces. High enough to break something if you landed wrong. In the week before the dinner, two things happened that I noted without fully weighing. Naomi texted me to ask if I'd be bringing anything to the dinner. This was normal, she usually asked. What wasn't normal was the question she added after. Are you doing okay? You seemed a little off at the 4th of July thing. I hadn't been off at the 4th of July thing. I'd been 11 weeks pregnant and not yet telling anyone, which meant I'd been sober and slightly tired and managing a low-grade nausea that I'd attributed publicly to a headache. The question felt like a probe. I texted back that I was fine, great actually, and looking forward to Saturday. Then Daniel got a call from his mother that lasted 45 minutes. When he came back into the room, his face had the specific arrangement of someone who has just been told something they are hoping I won't ask about. I asked what she'd called about. Just the dinner logistics, he said. She's moving the time up an hour, I believed him. I wrote it in the back of my mind in the category of things I could have pulled up if I'd chosen to, and I chose not to. I was happy. I had good news. I had an ultrasound photo in my purse. I thought good news was a gift you gave people and they received it. The dinner was 41 people. Extended family, a few business associates, two of Richard's golf friends. Gloria in taupe silk, working the arrival line the way she always did. Cheek close but not touching, a remark for everyone. When she got to me, she held my hands and said, Sloane, you look well. Not you look wonderful. Just, you look well filed, waited, not acted on. Daniel and I had agreed to announce after dinner, after the toasts. We were standing by the fire pit near the terrace balustrade with our club sodas when Naomi appeared beside me, friendly, close, and said, I heard the most interesting thing about you this week. She said it with her mother's smile, the wide one. I asked what she'd heard. She said, Oh, nothing. Just that you've been keeping secrets. Then she laughed and moved away before I could respond. My friend Petra was there as my plus one. Petra Osi is a contracts attorney and my closest friend for 11 years, and she has the professional advantage of being able to read a room the way I read a balance sheet. She was beside me 30 seconds after Naomi left. What did she just say to you? Petra asked. Nothing concrete. Sloane. She was planting something. I told her I was probably reading it wrong. I told her I was hormonal and anxious, and about to tell a complicated woman that her family was getting larger in a way she hadn't been consulted about. Petra gave me the look she gives me when I am explaining away, something I shouldn't be explaining away, but she didn't push it. The toast came after dessert. Daniel tapped his glass. Gloria was mid-conversation with one of Richard's golf associates and turned with her full, practiced attention. Daniel reached for my hand. We have news that we wanted to share here with all of you. His voice was cracking in the best way. Sloane and I are expecting a baby. For 1 second, it was exactly what I'd imagined. An aunt clapped. Someone said, Oh, how wonderful. Richard raised his glass. Petra beamed at me from across the fire pit. Then Gloria put her champagne down. She looked at Daniel, then at me. The way you look at something you've been expecting and have prepared for. The smile was gone. What replaced it wasn't anger. It was the certainty of a woman who believes she has finally been proven right about something she's been warning people about for years. She said it in the precise carrying voice she used when she wanted the entire room to hear without technically raising her volume. I think we all deserve to know whether this is actually real before we start celebrating. The aunt who had clapped went quiet. What? Daniel said. Your wife, Gloria said, not to him but to the room, has worked in financial fraud investigation for 7 years. She married to this family under a prenuptial agreement that she signed very quickly and very easily. She paused, letting that land. And now, conveniently, at a moment when Daniel is about to close the largest deal in the company's history, a deal that would substantially increase the trust's value, there is a pregnancy that nobody except Sloane's has independently verified. Someone's wine glass touched down too hard on the stone table. She is very good at documents, Gloria continued. What she hasn't provided is the one document that matters. Show us proof. Sonogram, blood work, a doctor's note. Show us something concrete right now. Or let us all agree that this announcement is exactly what I've been afraid it would be. 41 people, the fire pit crackling. Petra's face across the terrace, gone very still in the way she goes still when she's deciding whether to speak. Daniel said, Mom, stop. But he said it the way he said it, quietly, without weight, the voice of a man who has been stopping his mother his entire life without ever actually stopping anything. I felt the balustrade against my hip. I had the ultrasound photo in my purse. The rational move was to take it out, I know that. But the cold professional part of me, the part that doesn't show her hand in a negotiation, said, not like this, not as a performance of proof for her entertainment. So I stood my ground and said, evenly, Gloria, I'm 11 weeks pregnant. I have documentation. I'm happy to share it with Daniel, and with a doctor, and with any medical professional you'd like to name. What I'm not going to do is perform a verification for you at a dinner party. She took 2 steps toward me. You will show us proof, she said, lower now, which was somehow worse. Or I will tell this family exactly what kind of woman is standing on my terrace. She doesn't need to prove anything to you. Petra said from across the fire pit, moving toward us through the guests, who had formed the specific paralysis of people who sense violence and can't make themselves move. You rehearsed this, I said. The words came out before I'd decided to say them. But they were true, and I knew they were true. And I think some part of me needed to say them once, out loud before what happened next. You've been planning this. Something shifted in Gloria's face. Not guilt, more like confirmation. Like I'd named the thing she'd been certain I would eventually try to name. You think, she said, that because you're clever with numbers, you've built something untouchable. You haven't. She was within arm's reach now. Show them the proof. Right now, I don't owe you a performance. She reached for my purse. I don't know if she intended what came next or only intended the first motion and the second happened because bodies in close contact on an uneven surface don't follow intentions cleanly. What I know is that her hands came up and made contact with my shoulders and the balustrade was immediately behind my knees and the garden was 10 feet below. I went over. The world turned in a way worlds shouldn't turn, and I hit the lower terrace on my left side. I heard my shoulder rather than felt it at first. The specific sound of something structural failing. My hip caught the stone edging of the garden border. My head hit the soil rather than the stone, which was the one piece of luck in the entire evening. Above me, the terrace erupted. I heard Petra's voice, sharp and certain, saying things I couldn't quite assemble. I heard Daniel scrambling and then he was coming down the stairs. Not jumping, he came down the stairs, which I clocked even then, and his face when he reached me was gray and completely undone. Don't move, he kept saying. Don't move, Sloane. The baby. Petra was there before him. She came down the stairs at a run and was at my side with her fingers at my wrist and her eyes already doing the assessment before her knees hit the ground. She's not a nurse, but she has emergency training. The kind you get when you're a woman who travels alone for work. And she went into it automatically. Tell me where. Shoulder. Hip. I can breathe. I got the most important sentence out. Get the photo. Inside pocket of my purse. Get it. She didn't ask why. She reached into the purse that was still on the ground beside me and found the zip pocket and took out the small square of ultrasound paper and held it in front of my face. "Right here," she said, "both of you. Hold on." The ambulance took 8 minutes. I know because Petra told me later that she timed it from when she dialed. I know a lot of things about that night, from Petra's timestamps, because she was already thinking the way I would have been thinking if I hadn't been, lying in a garden with a dislocated shoulder and 2 cracked ribs. She was documenting. On the way to the ambulance, she had already photographed the terrace from below, the height of the drop, the stone edging. She had already taken the names of 3 witnesses who came down to the lower garden and asked if they could help. She had already written a time-stamped note in her own phone that read, "Gloria Kessler made physical contact with Sloane Vargas at the terrace. Balustrade at approximately 8:47 p.m. Sloane fell approximately 10 feet to the lower garden. Witnesses present. Petra Osi is the best person I know, and I want to be very clear about that before the story goes further. The hospital was one I'd never been to, a trauma center 40 minutes from the estate. They took me straight to a bay and a team appeared the way teams appear, quickly, without drama, everyone knowing their piece. They got a fetal monitor on me before they finished the triage intake, which told me the charge nurse had read the situation and made a decision. The Doppler pressed against in my abdomen. Static, and then fast, furious, steady as a train. A heartbeat at a 161 beats per minute. I cried. Not the quiet kind from when I saw the 2 lines, the ugly breaking, complete kind, the kind that has been building since a woman said, "Show us proof" to 41 people. I put my casted arm over my face, which was the wrong arm, and I didn't care. The OB on call said there was a small subchorionic hematoma, a bruise, essentially, on the uterine wall, from the impact. She said it was something to monitor, but that the heartbeat was strong and the measurements were on track and that the baby appeared, in her careful clinical language, remarkably unperturbed by recent events. I kept my hand on my belly the whole time she talked. My shoulder was dislocated, reduced in the ER, a procedure that is exactly as uncomfortable as it sounds. 2 ribs were cracked. My hip had a deep bruise that would turn spectacular colors over the following week. I would spend the next 6 weeks with my arm in a sling, which turned out to be one of the most useful injuries I've ever sustained. Daniel sat in the corner of the bay with my ultrasound photo in both hands, crying. His phone kept vibrating in his pocket. He kept looking at it. Even there, in that room, with the fetal monitor still beeping, he kept looking at the phone in his pocket. At 1 in the morning, I pretended to be asleep and listened to him in the hallway. He'd told the nurse he needed air. The door didn't close completely. I have spent 12 years working in evidence, and one of the things you learn working in evidence is that the most important information arrives when people think you're not listening, he said. She hit the lower garden. Pause. Yes, both of them are fine. Pause. I don't know what Mom was thinking. Pause. I know. And then, quietly, in a voice so careful it sounded like someone reading a statement they'd been coached on, I don't know that Mom pushed her. Exactly. There were a lot of people close to the balustrade. Harper, Sloane might have lost her balance. It happened very fast. Might have lost her balance. I lay still. I kept my eyes closed. And in the space where my ribs were cracked and my shoulder was throbbing and my baby's heart was beating at 161 beats per minute, something went absolutely cold and absolutely clear. My husband was already building the alternative story. I waited until he came back in and his breathing evened into sleep before I lifted my phone with my good arm and photographed my shoulder in the cast, and my ribs and my hip. Left-handed in a hospital bay at 2:30 in the morning, because I know what evidence is and I know it expires. The bruise pattern on my shoulders was symmetrical and hand-shaped, and it was not the bruise pattern of a woman who lost her balance. I sent the photos to 3 places: my email, Petra's email, and a secure cloud account I maintain for case files. Then I lay back and stared at the ceiling and started thinking clearly for the first time since 8:47. They discharged me after 2 days of monitoring. Daniel drove me to the condo. His condo, technically, where I'd been living since the wedding. And I noticed he'd packed a bag. He said he thought he should stay at the estate for a few days, to check on his mother. He said it with the specific casualness of a man who has rehearsed the sentence. I told him that was fine. The day after I got home, I called Petra and told her everything. What I'd heard in the hallway, what I'd seen in Daniel's face, what I understood about what was coming. She came over with her laptop and a legal pad and takeout from the Thai place she knows I stress eat from, and we sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours. She told me the thing I already knew but needed to hear from someone outside my own head. They have a version ready. It was probably ready before the dinner ended. You're the unstable woman who threw herself over a balustrade to manufacture sympathy. They'll say you've been angling at the trust since day one. They'll find every normal thing you ever did and reframe it as scheming. And if you go loud, if you start calling relatives and telling your side, you hand them the narrative of a hysterical woman. That is exactly what Gloria is counting on. I asked her what she thought I should do instead. She opened her legal pad. You build a case. The way you always build a case. Start from the primary evidence and work outward. The primary evidence, my hospital records. The shoulder, the ribs, the hip, the fetal monitor strip, the hematoma note. All of it time-stamped. All of it in institutional format that cannot be disputed. The photos from my phone, the shoulder bruising, hand-shaped and symmetrical. The ultrasound photo, both the one from the original scan and a fresh one the OB had done at the hospital. Dated, measured, proving beyond any professional doubt that the pregnancy was real, at the exact gestational age I'd claimed, showing a heartbeat that had survived a 10-foot fall. Petra's own notes from the night, witness names she'd collected, her time-stamped documentation of events at the terrace. And then Petra said the thing that changed the trajectory of everything. The estate has security cameras. I saw 2 on the exterior when we came through the garden last fall, probably more around the terrace. They record continuously for liability purposes. She looked at me. We don't ask Gloria for the footage. We subpoena it. I looked at my sling. We need an attorney, I said. I've already made 3 calls, she said. I have names. The attorney I hired was a woman named Renata Solis, who specialized in family law and personal injury, and had a calm, exacting manner that reminded me of my best professors. She had 22 years in practice, and she listened to the full account without interrupting, which is a skill rarer than it should be. When I finished, she told me 4 things. First, what Gloria had done. In a state that classifies assault against a pregnant person under enhanced provisions was potentially chargeable as a felony. The fact that Gloria had been explicitly informed, in front of 41 witnesses, that I claimed to be pregnant before she made physical contact was not a minor detail. It elevated the charge from simple assault to something that prosecutors would be very interested in. Second, the subpoena for the estate's camera footage would go directly to the security company that managed the system, not to the Kesslers. Institutional records from security companies are produced in response to subpoenas without the property owner's cooperation. We wouldn't have to ask anyone's permission. Third, the prenuptial agreement I'd signed was, in Renata's assessment, the most useful document in my file. This is the Kesslers' own instrument, signed and witnessed, stating unambiguously that you cannot make any claim against the trust or the company. In other words, their own paper establishes that the thing they're accusing you of, targeting Daniel for the family money, was legally impossible. They sealed off the route they're claiming you were trying to take, in writing, before the wedding. She slid the prenup back across her desk. They protected themselves from you, she said, and in doing so, they destroyed their own accusation. Fourth, the criminal and civil processes would run on separate tracks. The criminal case was the prosecutor's business, the civil case, the personal injury, the divorce, the custody question, was ours. We would build ours, carefully and completely, and let the criminal case develop on its own schedule. I walked out of Renata's office into a gray November afternoon and sat in my car for a moment. The shoulder ached in the cold. The baby was moving for the first time that week. The barely perceptible flutter that felt like a sentence being typed from the inside. I thought about the prenup sitting in my fireproof box alongside my licenses and my condo deed, the document they'd given me to protect themselves. Gloria had spent 30 years building instruments of control. She had built one that was now, legally, mine. The group chat arrived the way the most decisive evidence always arrives. Accidentally. Because people who have done wrong things rarely have the discipline to cover them comprehensively. Naomi had been organizing a family matter, a charitable donation in Richard's name, some logistical coordination, and she was adding people to a group thread on her phone while multitasking. She added me. Then, 8 minutes later, she removed me. But 8 minutes was enough for the full thread history to download to my device, going back 3 weeks before the estate dinner. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea when I scrolled up and started reading. The tea went cold the way things go cold when you stop being present in the room. The thread was titled Kessler Family, Private, 42 participants. The messages started 22 days before the dinner. Gloria, I want to discuss the situation with Daniel's wife before Saturday. I think the family should be prepared. Naomi, what are you thinking? Gloria. She has been evasive about the pregnancy. She claims to be 10 weeks, but hasn't shown anyone anything. This is the exact moment, before the trust restructuring is finalized, that something like this would be deployed. A cousin, Gloria. Do you think she's actually faking it? Gloria. I think she's smart enough to know the timing. I think we should make sure, publicly, while the family is together. If she's genuine, she'll have documentation and it will take 30 seconds. If she's not, better to know now in front of witnesses. Naomi, I can set it up so there's momentum going in. Make sure the family already has questions before the dinner. Gloria, yes. And I'll address it directly after the toasts. Make it about verification, not accusation. The language matters. Naomi, what if she does have documentation? Gloria, then she shows it. She should have to. Another message, 4 days before the dinner. Gloria, I want everyone to stay calm and let me handle it. This has happened to this family before, and we didn't protect ourselves. We're not making that mistake again. I read the thread 4 times. Then I plugged my phone into my laptop. I backed up the complete thread, every message, every participant name, every timestamp, to 3 locations. My secure cloud account, Petra's encrypted drive, and an email to Renata's firm marked urgent. I did not respond to anything in the thread. I did not call any of the 42 participants. I did not forward screenshots to relatives. I did what I had been trained to do with evidence I might not have for long. I preserved it correctly. Renata's office called me back within the hour after I sent the email. Her paralegal said, "She wants you to come in tomorrow morning." She says, "Do not discuss this with anyone outside our established circle until you've spoken with her." I said I understood. Then, I sat with the thread for another hour, reading it again, and I noticed the detail that made everything else make sense. This has happened to this family before. I asked Renata about it the next morning. She said she could look into the family's legal history. What she found through public records and the kind of information that appears in civil case filings was this. 27 years ago, when Daniel was 9, Gloria's first husband, Daniel's biological father, not Richard, had been involved in a dispute over the early version of the family company. A former business partner had filed a paternity claim, alleging that a child from his relationship with a company associate was actually the biological heir to a stake in the business. The claim had eventually been dismissed, but not before 18 months of litigation. that had cost the family significant money and significantly more peace of mind. Gloria had been the one to fight it. She had been the one, at 37, to rebuild the company's financial structure in a way that protected it from similar claims going forward. She had been the one to move the assets into the trust framework that Richard and she had then jointly managed for decades. She's had spent Tisha's years building walls around what was hers. And when I married her son and then announced a pregnancy at the precise moment, the trust was being restructured to include Daniel's projects more substantially. She had looked at me and seen a ghost she'd been fighting since 1997. I sat with that for a long time. It explained the certainty on her face on the terrace. The specific righteousness of a woman who believes she is finally preventing something she has been dreading for most of her adult life. Understanding why someone did something and deciding what happens next are different conversations. I understood Gloria completely. It changed nothing about what she had done to me and to my daughter on that terrace. The camera footage arrived via Renata's office 14 days after the subpoena. The security company complied without incident, which is what security companies do when they receive a valid legal instrument, and a woman made physical contact with another woman on a recorded terrace. Renata warned me before she played it that I didn't have to watch, that the court would see it regardless. I watched it anyway. I needed to know what was true with my own eyes, because for 6 weeks I had been living inside a version of events that the Kesslers kept trying to edit, and I needed to see the original. The camera angle covered the terrace, balustrade, and the lower garden. No audio. The footage was high definition, and the timestamp ran in the upper left corner. I watched myself in a green dress, standing by the balustrade. I watched Gloria approach. I watched 41 people go still around us. I watched Daniel stand between us and do nothing. I counted 11 seconds of nothing. The same 11 seconds Petra had told me she'd counted from her own angle across the terrace. I watched Gloria's hands come up and make contact with my shoulders. I watched myself go over the balustrade. It was not ambiguous. It was not two women jostling near a railing. It was a directed push, both hands, full contact, in high definition with a timestamp and a clear angle. Renata sat across from me when the footage ended. "You don't have to say anything," she said. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I asked the question I'd been carrying since the night Daniel said lost her balance in the hospital hallway. The statement Daniel signed for their lawyers, calling it an accident. Does that affect anything? Renata looked at me for a moment. In the criminal case, it's an obstacle for the prosecution that they will work around using the footage and the witness statements. In the divorce and custody proceedings, a husband who signed a false statement to cover his mother's assault of his pregnant wife is not a person who is awarded meaningful custody access. She paused. Your husband made choices. Those choices are in the record now. I nodded. What do you want to do? She asked. I had been thinking about this for 6 weeks. I'd been thinking about it since the night in the hospital bay. I'd been thinking about it with the careful, systematic patience I bring to every case I work, and I'd reached the same conclusion from every direction I approached it from. I want the truth on the record, I said. In the right order, in the right form, in the right place. I don't want a confrontation. I don't want a public fight. I want a judge, and I want the documents, and I want what's true to be what's official. Renata wrote something on her pad. I can do that, she said. They tried to buy it first. They always try to buy it first. Naomi called on a Wednesday, her voice doing the specific work of being both generous and condescending at the same time. She said the family understood this had been a difficult time for me. She said Gloria had been under tremendous stress with the trust restructuring, that it had been a moment of terrible judgment, and that the family was prepared to offer a settlement. A personal apology from Gloria, a financial payment, and a mutual agreement to move forward without further legal proceedings. She named a number, I sat with the phone against my ear and thought about what the number was supposed to mean. It was a number that said, "We know what happened and we know you know, and we're offering you enough to make it worth accepting our version." It was a number that said, "You came from nothing, and we're offering you enough to build something. And surely that's worth more than being right." It was Gloria, through Naomi's voice, telling me one more time that a woman without money could always be bought by a family with enough of it. I said, "Naomi, I need you to write down my answer exactly, because Gloria will ask you what I said." A pause. "I'm not interested in the number. I'm not interested in your version of what happened. I have my own condo. I have my own career. I have a prenuptial agreement your mother wrote that proves I was never after the family money. What I want is the truth in the record, and my daughter protected from the people who were present on that terrace. That is all I want. You can keep the rest," Naomi said very quietly and without the condescension. "You're making a mistake." "Write it down exactly," I said, and ended the call. I sent the date, time, substance, and final sentence of the call to Renata in writing within 5 minutes. Old habit. Document first. The settlement conference was Renata's idea. A structured session before any formal trial. Some as matters can be resolved between parties with lawyers present. She pushed for it because she wanted the Kesslers to see what we had in one room, at one table, in order. I chose my clothes the night before. A simple charcoal dress that fit over a 6 months pregnant belly without making the pregnancy the costume. I had the folder organized the same way I organize case files. Primary evidence first, supporting evidence second, context third, conclusion last. I arrived before the Kesslers, which Renata had advised, and I sat with my back to the window so the light would fall toward them when they came in. A small thing. Gloria's trick. I had spent 2 years watching how she ran rooms. They came in together. Gloria and Cream, two attorneys flanking her. Richard, who looked smaller than he had in September and would not meet my eyes. Naomi, immaculate and watchful. Daniel, last, taking the seat furthest from me, who looked like he hadn't slept since the fall. I looked at my husband. I'd loved him. I still carried a version of him that was real and good. The man who wrote my mother's birthday in his phone. The man who'd cried with his hands over his mouth when I told him about the baby. That version existed. It just hadn't been strong enough when it needed to be, and there is no document that fixes that. Gloria sat across from me and looked at the folder, then at my belly, and then at my face. I watched her try to find the version of me she'd always seen, the calculating woman, the fraud, the ghost, from 1997, wearing my clothes. I watched her look for it and not quite find it. What she was looking at was a 33-year-old woman who had spent 6 weeks doing the thing she was professionally built to do, and the folder between us was the result. Gloria's lead attorney began the standard opening about reasonable resolutions and protecting all parties' interests. Gloria cut him off. She had always cut people off when the stage felt like hers. She looked directly at me. "Let's not waste the room's time," she said. "I'll say what I've always said. Daniel married someone whose entire professional life is built around finding financial irregularities, who signed a prenup without hesitation, who announced a pregnancy at the exact moment the trust was being restructured to Daniel's benefit." She paused. "I acted badly on the terrace. I'll say that clearly. But the reason I acted badly is because I know a scheme's when I see one, and I saw one." I let her finish. I waited until the sentence had sat in the room long enough that everyone had heard it, absorbed it, made their initial judgment about it. Then I nodded at Renata. She opened the folder. I did not stand. I did not raise my voice. I laid the pages on the table in the order I had planned, and I narrated each one in the same register I use when I'm presenting findings to a client. Calm, informational, without affect. "This is the ultrasound from 8 weeks," I said. "Dated, measured, with my name and my OB's credentials. This is the hospital ultrasound from the night of the dinner, done in the trauma center. The gestational age matches exactly. The heartbeat measured at 161 beats per minute." I set them side by side. There's no baby, you said. This is the baby. Gloria's jaw moved. This is my hospital record from the night of the dinner. Dislocated shoulder, 2 cracked ribs, deep hip contusion, subchorionic hematoma, a uterine bruise from blunt impact force. I set it down. These are photographs of my shoulder taken in the hospital bay at approximately 2:30 in the morning. The bruise pattern is bilateral, consistent with contact from 2 hands placed here. I touched my own shoulders briefly, and not consistent with a person who lost her balance. Richard looked away. This is the footage from your estate's exterior security system. Renata opened her laptop. She played it once, without commentary, 11 seconds of Daniel standing frozen, both hands, the balustrade, me falling. The room was completely silent when it ended. This is the incident report generated by the police when they responded to the emergency call. The officer's notes. The witness statement from a family friend who was standing 6 feet away. I reached the last stack. This, I said, is a text message thread from a family group chat 22 days before the dinner, in which the plan to publicly demand proof of my pregnancy in front of the assembled family was discussed, coordinated, and assigned roles. I laid the first page down. Gloria's words, make her prove it in front of everyone. Naomi's response, I'll set it up so there's momentum going in. I laid the second page. The plan was made with my name in it, 3 weeks before any of you saw me that night. Gloria opened her mouth. I kept going. And this is the prenuptial agreement that your family drafted, had witnessed, and had me sign 18 months before this pregnancy existed. I placed it on top of the pile. This document legally bars me from any claim against the trust, the company, or any Kessler asset under any circumstance. You protected yourselves from the scheme you're accusing me of running. You made it legally impossible. Your own document is the most complete refutation of your own accusation that exists. I folded my hands on the table. You built the evidence that clears me, I said. You wrote it, you signed it, you filed it, and then you made plans to publicly humiliate me anyway. And when that plan didn't go the way you intended, you pushed me off a terrace, and your son signed a statement calling it an accident. The room was the specific quiet of a space where something that was going to happen has happened and cannot be taken back. I looked at Daniel against the wall. He was crying, not the performative kind, the hollow, exhausted kind of a man who has been watching the truth become undeniable and has run out of ways to stand next to it. I know why you signed it, I said to him. I've known since the hospital. The trust funds your projects. If you stand next to me, your mother turns off the money and you become the man you've always been afraid to become. I understood that 6 weeks ago. I kept my voice level. I'm not angry about it. I just need you to understand that your daughter will know, someday, that you were in that room and made that choice, and she will decide for herself what it means. He put his face in his hands. Gloria broke the way people break when the story they have been living for decades has finally run completely out of road. Not quietly. She stood and her chair went back, and she looked around the room for a face that would reflect her version back at her, and none of them did. Do you have any idea, she said, and her voice had lost all of its precision, what I rebuilt? Do you know what I built from nothing after that man took what he took from this family? 27 years. I built 27 years with my own hands, and I swore nobody would ever do to this family. What happened to your family, I said carefully, did not happen to you at my hands. She stared at me. I know about 1997, I said. I understand why you looked at me and saw a ghost. I think you've been fighting her for a very long time. I let that sit. But I am not her. I was never her. And the documents on this table establish that more clearly than anything I could say. Gloria sat down. Not slowly. The way people sit when they're in control. The way people sit when their legs stop working. Renata laid one final document on top of the pile. A formal complaint has been filed with the district attorney's office, she said. The footage, the bruise documentation, and the premeditation evidence from the group thread have been submitted. The DA's office has indicated they consider the premeditation element to substantially elevate the charge. Mrs. Kessler will be contacted. Richard had gone the color of old paper. Naomi was looking at the table. Daniel was still against the wall, face still in his hands. And Gloria sat across from me, looking at a folder of documents she had handed me, piece by piece without knowing it. The prenup she'd built. The camera she'd installed. The thread she'd let her daughter type from a family group on a phone. The witnesses she'd chosen to hold the announcement dinner in front of. Every instrument she'd thought was a weapon had turned out to be evidence. And it was all here, in order, on the table where she'd planned to win. I gathered the documents back into the folder. I squared the edges. I stood. I came into this marriage with my own house, my own career, and my own savings account, I said. I signed your prenup without argument. I have never once, in 4 years, asked your family for $1 or a favor or anything else. I picked up the folder. I still don't want the money. I want my daughter safe. I want the truth on the record. That's all I came in here for, and that's what I'm leaving with. I walked out of the conference room into a gray February afternoon. Petra was waiting in the lobby with coffee in one hand and her phone in the other, and when she saw my face, she said, "Done?" "Done," I said. The criminal case moved on its own timeline, because criminal cases always do. Gloria accepted a plea to felony assault of a pregnant person. Probation, mandatory counseling, a permanent record. Her attorneys argued for leniency on the basis of her community contributions and her age, and the judge acknowledged both before noting that neither excused what the footage showed or what the thread established about the premeditation. She is no longer the trustee of the Kessler Family Trust. The trust's own governance provisions allowed the co-trustees, Richard and an independent financial advisor, to suspend a trustee under criminal indictment and remove one upon conviction. Both provisions triggered. The woman who had controlled that trust for 12 years lost her grip on it because she had pushed a pregnant woman off a terrace to protect it. The divorce was finalized before my daughter was born. The custody order went the only direction it could go. To the parent who had not dislocated a shoulder and cracked 2 ribs, and who had not signed a false statement to cover the parent who had. Daniel was granted supervised visitation, contingent on a demonstrated period of good faith compliance and his completion of a family therapy program Renata had specified. I did not close that door completely because my daughter is allowed to know her father if he chooses, someday, to be someone worth knowing. That choice is his. Everything going forward is his choice. Naomi was never charged, because coordinating a plan to demand proof of pregnancy from a family member, however cruel, is not a crime. What it did establish, in the civil proceedings and the custody record, was a pattern of deliberate hostility that informed the custody arrangement substantially. She sent me a text 3 months after the settlement that I read once and did not respond to. My daughter was born on a Tuesday in April. She arrived 6 days early and entirely on her own schedule, which felt right. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. She came out furious and healthy and has not stopped being either. I named her Ines, after my maternal grandmother. My grandmother, who drove a city bus for 31 years and bought a small house on a bus driver's salary, and told me once that a woman's most important asset was the ability to stay calm when someone was trying to make her afraid. Ines. The name of a woman who understood what documents were worth. I have both ultrasound photos framed on my dresser, the grainy one from 8 weeks, the accusation, and the crisp one from the anatomy scan. The answer side by side. I see them every morning. I'm still a forensic accountant. I'm still precise, and I still write everything down. The condo still has the same kitchen counter where Petra and I laid out the legal pad and started making the list. Petra is Ines's godmother. She comes over on Sunday afternoons and holds the baby while I catch up on work. And sometimes we sit with coffee and talk about other things entirely, which is the best kind of afternoon. People ask me whether I ever wanted to scream at Gloria, whether I wanted to stand in front of 41 people and match her volume and tell the entire assembled family exactly what was happening, whether the calms was an act or a strategy, or whether it cost me something. The honest answer: the calm wasn't an act. It was the only thing I had that she couldn't take. Gloria had money, she had the trust. She had 40 years of running rooms. She had a family that had organized itself around her certainty for decades. She had a son who loved her more than he loved his own judgment. She had a story she'd been rehearsing since 1997. What she didn't have was patience because she had never needed it. Patience is what you develop when you've never had anyone else's money to fall back on. When the only instrument you've built is the truth, carefully assembled, you treat it carefully, because you know it's the only thing you've got. The folder wasn't clever. It was just everything true, in order, on the table. It didn't need me to shout. It didn't need me to be angry. It just needed to exist, correctly documented, in a room with a judge. The scream was the trap. Gloria had built her whole evening around the scream. She needed me hysterical and loud and matching her energy so the room could see two women fighting and conclude that the truth was somewhere in the middle. The folder said there was no middle. The folder said there was one thing that was true, and it had timestamps. Here is what I want to leave you with, because I've thought about this since the night in the hospital bay, when my baby's heartbeat came through the static. And I understood that the situation was going to be exactly as bad as I'd suspected, and I was going to have to be calm enough to build something from it. The most powerful position in any conflict is the one held by a person who has already done the work before the conflict arrives, who has already put the truth somewhere it can be found, who doesn't need the confrontation to go her way because the confrontation is not actually the point. The paper is the point. The documentation is the point. The timestamp and the witness name and the certified copy are the point. Because those things are still true after the room empties and the voices fade and the family decides on its version. They are still true, sitting in a fireproof box or a secure cloud account waiting to be opened. My grandmother drove a bus for 31 years. She kept every pay stub in a shoebox. When the transit authority tried to shortchange her pension by claiming she'd taken an extended leave she had no record of, she pulled out the shoebox and proved her case without raising her voice. "You document everything," she told me once, when I was 12. "Not because you expect to be wronged. Because the record is the truth, and everything else is just whoever's telling the story today." I kept records my whole life. I kept a folder. Gloria kept a trust, and in the end, the folder was the better investment. My name is Sloane Vargas. I have a condo in Denver, a forensic accounting practice, and a daughter named after a woman who stayed calm and kept her records and proved her case without raising her voice. Ines is 4 months old. She has strong opinions about everything and no patience for anything that requires waiting, which means she is completely unlike her mother and absolutely her own person already. I'm going to tell her the whole story someday, when she's old enough to understand it. I'm going to tell her about the terrace and the hospital and the folder and what was true and how we proved it. And I'm going to tell her, you document everything, not because you expect the world to be unfair, but because the record is the truth and the truth is worth keeping. That's the whole inheritance I care about. Everything else is just paperwork.